I guess, a little bit of who they are. Um, I guess, yeah, start about who they are, what they do, things like that. So, I don't know, Mike, if you want to start.
Yep. So my name is Mike Edwards. I'm from Union, New Jersey. I live in Jersey City now. I'm the president of Marquee Agency, which is a trucking insurance specialist. I've been working at Marquee for about 12 years now. Peter and I first met many, many years ago selling real estate in Roselle Park. And I'm just really honestly privileged to be a part of this conversation. I've learned so much over the last 2 weeks. I cannot tell you who I was prior to 2 weeks ago is not who I am today. And between the murder of George Floyd and between all of the videos, the Trayvon Martins, the Freddie Grays, the Breonna Taylors, all of them, the videos, I have now woken up. Like many white people and many people in this country have woken up to the reality that we are a great country. And I love America, but we have a serious systemic racist problem here. And we need to acknowledge that problem because we're never going to heal the racial wounds in this country until we acknowledge what the problem is. And I'm very privileged to be a part of that conversation.
All right. Joe?
Yeah, so Pete and I went to high school together. We played football together. We grew up in, suburbia, so to speak. It was predominantly a white school. There was a handful, of African-American and a few other races in our school, but it was predominantly white. I feel like I grew up in a household that really never spoke about racism or anything like that. Could I admit that there was maybe some undertones of racism in the 80s and 90s growing up? Of course. Now I think there's magnifying glasses on everything that's going on. I'm the first to be a supporter of police and my local police department and all police in general. I'm a big advocate for our military and everything like that. I think there's bad apples in any industry or any walk of life. And those individuals should be dealt with accordingly and serve justice. I do believe that there is still racism present. I think it's a generational thing for sure. It's interesting, Pete, that you mentioned that, our generation hasn't really come to light and really spoke up. I kind of feel like I'm stuck in between Generation X and the Millennials. I think there's a fraction of us that consider ourselves Xennials, where we relate more towards the pre-technology era age, but also can relate to the millennial generation as well. But, I think that it's great that this type of topic has surfaced. Unfortunately, it had to come to light in the way that it did. And I feel terrible for the way that it came to light. And, I know that it's happened time and time again. And a lot of times things don't change. We've seen that with our gun laws and things other than just, police brutality. But I don't think that you should throw all police under the bus for the actions of a few. So, that's my stance. But I think the conversation has to progress beyond just talk, right, and protest. I think obviously the protests get attention, and from there we could, make positive change and improve on certain things, especially, race relations. So.
Yeah. Stace?
All right, hey guys. Stacey Lamb. I'm in Oahu, in Hawaii right now.
Nice.
I grew up here until I was 11, and we moved to New Jersey, New York, and then I moved in with my aunt, and she was in Howell, so I was there for 2 years. That's where I met Pete, and definitely a unique background, just because being mixed in Hawaii, racism, it's here, but it's towards white people more than anything, to be honest, and not as mean. There's more systemic and historical background to it, being that they were their own country prior to Hawaii coming in, and that's still here. There's still people that were alive during that crossover, so there's not that it's hate, and that's the thing. Going to New Jersey, it was eye-opening for me. People were like, "What are you, black or white?" And I was like, "I'm from Hawaii." Like, I didn't identify. I didn't grow up with a black parent. My mom was white, and my stepdad was white. So all along those lines. And then I've lived here most of my life. Again, I was in New Jersey. I moved to the city after I graduated college. But we also live in Arizona, where my kids actually did see the racism because there's such an older community, and we were in a nice area, but just people that haven't been out of Arizona. So a sheltered community, I guess I could say. And my kids are Pacific Islander and then Black and white. So they have all the things. Definitely a unique perspective. And having my bachelor's in ethnic studies from University of Hawaii, where the focus there is going to be a lot of Polynesia. But I had several classes about African American studies where, I mean, Obama's obviously our golden child, rightfully so. But I agree with Joey too with the police. Like, I back the police. My dad's retired military. Obviously, there's a few bad seeds, just as in any community or job. There's going to be a bunch of not so good people, but we got to get those people out, and that's where it starts.
Perfect. And I mean, you guys all know me. I mean, I grew up I was born in Staten Island. I grew up in Howell. Like Joe said, it was predominantly, you know, and Stacey was there too, it was predominantly white. The ironic part is, and I think maybe I don't want to say I was lucky. I just think, you know, our generation learned from our parents where racism wasn't something that was accepted and tolerated. You know, I can honestly say, I think growing up, I didn't experience racism from classmates or even from the teachers. You know, parents did hold me accountable just as like my parents were. So I don't know if that was unique to Howell or unique to Jackson for the most part. And I think that even seeing some of my friends now growing up with, you know, they're still somewhat the same. They still have some of the same attitudes. As far as with the police, I think that's a topic with me that hits home because prior to my position, or where I'm at now, I used to hire police officers. And so we made an effort to hire more of a diverse workforce. And it wasn't a matter of saying, hey, we're just going to hire African Americans. It was educating the African American population, the Hispanic population, that what the process is as far as becoming a police officer. You know, there's a civil service test you need to take, providing classes to help learn about that test, and integrating more minorities in there. And we integrated a community policing program. So there's definitely some solutions out there, and I don't think people are talking about. I think one thing that I am hearing is that, you know, there are a few bad apples, but me personally, I don't think that reflects everybody. So one of the first things I do want to talk about is where do we go from right now with this country? You know, we've had a couple of days of the riots. We have leaders that are right now saying that they're going to take action. But what do you believe needs to be done to move the country forward right now? I don't know who wants to go first.
I'll be the first to just step into this landmine, but I honestly think that it has to start with leadership from the top down. For the last 2 decades, I've seen our political machine break down to the point where it's a stalemate. It's ugly. No one wants to meet in the middle or talk about, you know, positive change. Everyone has to take a hardline stance on their, you know, positions so that they could get reelected in a lot of instances. And unfortunately, if they're not going to have open lines of communication, I think we'll be in this perpetual loop of, you know, back and forth, you know, lobbying insults and never coming up with a solid solution that will actually be effective. And, you know, I have 3 children. I want nothing more than for my children to be, you know, live in a safe, more opportune, you know, United States of America. But it seems like right now there's so much tension that our leadership really has to step up and unite, as opposed to always be, you know, shooting each other down. And, you know, it starts at the very top, and, you know, our president is not helping at all, you know, with tweets and things like that. But, you know, without, I think the politicians and both sides of the aisle, because that's really, they're the lawmakers. They're the ones that can effectuate change, and they really have to step up to the plate in these instances. We've seen it time and time again where they'll start talking the talk, but nothing ever happens.
All right. What about you, Mike?
Look, I think the first thing that has to happen is very simple. It is very simple. We need to acknowledge the problem in this country. These protests, and I hate the fact that people are trying to hijack the narrative of these protests and make them into rioters and looters when 99% of the people out in these streets are not rioting and they're not looting. They're peacefully protesting. President Trump, a couple of days ago, in order to do a photo op in front of a church around the corner from the White House, dispersed tear gas into a peaceful protest. He used the military to launch tear gas into peaceful protesters. That is not okay. It is just not okay in 2020 or any other year in the United States of America for something like that to happen. The first thing that we have to do is we have to acknowledge the problem. The problem is, as great of a country as we are, and I believe it, we are the greatest country in the world. We have done amazing things, but the fact is, very clearly, this country has a very racist past. And we have whitewashed over that racist past our entire childhoods. We never really learned about what happened. We learned about the Civil War. We learned about Reconstruction. We learned about Jim Crow laws and segregation and the civil rights movement, but we never really went into mass incarceration. We never spoke about how the United States of America represents 5% of the world's population. We represent 25% of the prison population. 1 out of 4 prisoners in the world are in our cells in the land of the free. 1 out of 4. And 6.5% of the country, black males, 40% of those prisoners, black males, most of them in prison for drug charges, 25 years to life for a first offense crack possession charge because of mandatory minimum sentences that were introduced first by Nixon and then carried out by the Reagan administration, the war on drugs, which was really just the war on blacks. Because I promise you, there were more whites doing drugs in the 80s than there were blacks. But those white kids with cocaine, they got a pass. And the black kids who were 18, 19, they got life sentences, and they're still sitting in those prisons to this day. 1 out of 4 prisoners in the world are sitting in the land of the free behind bars. That is the problem. That is a problem. And if we don't acknowledge that problem and how law enforcement drove those children into those prisons, we're not going to solve this issue. We're just not. We're not going to stop the protests. It's not going to stop. In order to heal the racial wounds in this country, we have to acknowledge our past. We have a very racist past. It was brutal what happened to people of color in this country, and it is time that we make amends for it. And the first step as a white person, and I say this to any other white person, is we need to listen and we need to acknowledge this problem. My whole life, up until 2 weeks ago, I saw everything from one side of the coin. Matthew McConaughey actually just said this exact same thing. I've always looked at it from one side of the coin, but for the first time in my life, I'm now looking at it from the other side of the coin. How black people feel about the police. I don't fear when I'm driving down the road getting pulled over for a tailgate violation. I don't fear a police officer unholstering his weapon on me because I look like a robbery suspect. That's white privilege. And there's nothing wrong with privilege. We all should have the privilege of driving down the street without fear of being pulled over or walking around the neighborhood without a neighbor calling the police on us because we look suspicious. But people of color in this country, they don't have that privilege. And in 2020, that is not okay. So that's the first thing we need to do.
What's your take, Stacey?
Great points all around. I think that, I know it sounds like being a dead horse with the voting, but we as our generation, kind of going back to that, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have all this. We got our information how we did, and it wasn't just like, oh, how many was there today? So having that accessibility puts a different, brings a different point in because everybody has access to all this information. Like you're saying with Trump, like he's sitting on his toilet just tweeting stuff. Like you need a PR, somebody to in between that. Like he makes good points, but it's just terrible. And again, with
filter, I agree.
Yeah, but
We'll agree on that.
yeah, we used to have, like, I never saw what, you know, George Bush, I'm sure he had a PR guy tweeting it out, so it came out way nicer. And that whole media aspect and having access to everything, it's like, it's almost too much for me anyway. Like I turn off my Facebook sometimes, so I'm like, I can't. I'm getting stuff from different, like who knows what's right and what's real. So having that thrown on top of everything that's happening, it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. But again, with the white privilege and not having access to that, because I'm looking that up. I'm looking up statistics from forever. Like, why are there, even in Hawaii, the black male population in the jails, it's Polynesians followed by black males, and then like a little bit of white, a little bit of Mexican, but it's everywhere. And how is that going on? How long after the Civil War? Like Hawaii shouldn't even be, I don't know how we can reciprocate the numbers that the mainland does, because we're not even close. So again, voting, getting out there and not just protesting. Like, are all these protesters going to show up on voting, like to go vote? That's what you got to get to the top, and the people in the legislation that are making differences and get the right people in there. So having these terrible things happen has allowed people to come out and get out there and speak, and you actually see people that I otherwise wouldn't have been even looking at, you know, and their point of view and their perspective on it. And when they can be the leaders of the country and get our voices heard, that's where things are going to change.
All right. So I'll give my opinion. So it's gonna be a little bit different. It's gonna be on the other side. So I'm looking at it as someone who's been in office and seeing how bills are made. You know, I've worked down at the state level all the way down to the local level. And I think one of the biggest things as challenges and something gets me upset is this quick answer that if you vote, it's going to change. I think that's a fallacy, because what happens is that you have politicians, no matter what side, that usually when it comes time to election is when they're the loudest. And they make promises that they're going to do X, Y, Z. And usually their policies are determined now more so with what people are saying on social media rather than peeling back the numbers. So if you take Michael's example, Michael is giving numbers as far as, all right, and I think that's one of the things that angers people is that these numbers come up as far as this. No one's asked the question, well, why are we seeing these numbers? We're quick to say it's racism. I'm not saying whether it is or not, but in some cases, you do have police officers, certain districts are dealing with violent crimes that we're not talking about. We do know that we do have black on black crime, we have white on white crime, we have crime in general. For me, I think one of the things that I would like to see more is for leaders within the black community to address crime, to address some of these social issues. And what do I mean by that is, what are we doing to make sure that our children within the community are being put on a better path towards education, taking them out of a situation that's going to cause them to be around people who are more likely to commit crime. You know, these are conversations I think that within the black community we're not having. While we do have a past that's filled with racism, we forget. In our own yearbook, I think 95, 96, one of the people who we don't talk about who's still around, who's not a fan of Trump, is Colin Powell. There was a time when people talked about Colin Powell running for president. I remember growing up, he was a hero, even though he was a Republican. And under George Bush had, you know, a Republican female who's now, you know, Condoleezza Rice, and look at the things she's doing. What I would like to see more is that we have heroes, and I consider them American heroes. You know, we talk about Black History Month, but how many African Americans could equate to American heroes that, regardless of racism or their background, have shown how resilient they are, face adversity, and succeed? I mean, I think one of the things I like seeing is that when it comes to the advancement of African Americans, whether it's in entertainment, whether it's in sports, whether it's in business, look at the Serena Williams sisters. You have two sisters who we know their story as far as how successful they are on the tennis courts. Serena Williams has been known to deal with racism, but she's still someone who's a part owner of the Dolphins. I believe she's a part owner. She owns her own clothing line. And she's made something of herself. So why are we not hearing enough of those stories? Some of these role models, you know what? regardless of how someone feels about me, I'm still going to go out there and succeed. I think that's a conversation that we're not having is resiliency, and just like blocking it out and doing what you need to do to succeed. Um, that's my take. Another thing that is coming up in the news, I find more and more, is that now that we have the protests, we're talking about the police, we're finding that other conversations of racism is coming up. One of them is now like the stock market and the economy. I want to know you guys' take. Do you feel like there's racism embedded within the economy, or is it something else that's going on there? Mike, I'll start with you.
I mean, there's clearly racism in economy. You can talk to any person of color and they'll tell you, you look at any statistics that will tell you that job applicants that have black sounding names don't get called on as much as people with white sounding names. That has been proven for years and years and years. So there's absolutely racism going on in the economy. And I'll just say something to your point. It seems to me like there's two conversations happening in this country. There are those who say, this is America, you can overcome any challenge, no matter where you come from, you can realize your dreams, you can be passionate, you can succeed. And that's great. I agree with that. But that's not the conversation that we're having. That's not what Black Lives Matter is about. That's not why these people are out in these streets protesting. Overcoming challenges is one thing. Institutional racism is another, and it is very real. The statistics are very clear on this. They have been very clear on this since the end of the Civil War in 1865. There's an amazing movie out called 13th. It was an Academy Award-winning movie. It's a documentary by Ava DuVernay, and it's a phenomenal movie. It talks about the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. And the exception, a lot of people don't realize that slavery did not actually end at the Civil War. It didn't. It took on another form. And the form that slavery took on was criminal punishment. And the reason why that is because there is one exception to the 13th Amendment that abolishes slavery except in the form of criminal punishment. And that's very important because after 1865, what the South did after Lincoln was assassinated was they just went out and they arrested black people for no reason. They arrested them for loitering, vagrancy, trespassing. They put them in chain gangs and they put them to work. They rebuilt the South on the backs of slaves. I can't believe I'm saying that, but it's the truth. It's history. And fast forward all the way to the 60s, to the Civil Rights Movement, people again think that the story ended there. Civil rights movement, we're all equal. But what they don't also tell you is that in '68, Richard Nixon ran on a law and order platform because crime was going up. And that wasn't because people of color were getting equal rights. It was because of the baby boomer population. All these kids that were born after World War II became adults in the 60s, and they became hippies, and they were doing drugs, and they were robbing to support their habits. So politicians very cleverly seized on that opportunity. Guys like Nixon went out and they talked about cleaning up the streets from animals and thugs. And those were just code words. And we all knew, everyone back then, all the white people knew exactly who Nixon was talking about. So they went out, the police, and they absolutely profiled blacks. They threw them in prisons. They did that throughout the entire 70s. Reagan took it and even went even further in the 80s. Clinton did it in the 90s. Every president, Nixon, has been defined as a president that is tough on crime. Nixon was the one that really started that conversation. So to get back to the point here, there's two sides to this argument. There's the people who say, this is America, you can overcome anything you want. And then there's those people that say, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about institutional racism, a criminal justice system that is not fair to people of color. It has not been fair since 1865. This is not a Donald Trump problem either. It is really a 400-year-old problem that, again, reverting back to my intro statement, we've never really come to grips with in this country. We've never really spoken about it before in a clear way.
Joe, what about you? Oh, Sketch Day, sorry.
Will Smith, I know I'm all like Hollywood, but how he said that racism isn't getting worse, it's just getting filmed.
Getting
And I
filmed,
think that's
exactly.
a great point. And seeing Mike's take on things is super interesting, just where you're coming from in your background and how it's like, it's an eye-opening experience. Like, wait, what? All this happened when? What? Obviously, as an ethnic studies major, it's something that I dove into, and I guess maybe just being Black as well, just getting educated on it. But yeah, I think that's just part of it, is that it's always been there, and it isn't something that's going to change overnight. It's something that now is just getting filmed, and people are more aware of it.
Exactly right.
Joe, what is your take?
Yeah, I mean, I know your question was regarding the
economy
and, you know, wages and things like that. So I think an inner city African American has a much larger hill to climb than someone that may have been raised in suburbia America, even rural America, for sure. You know, finding similar paying jobs, there's definitely a wage gap there, without a doubt. Women experience it as well. I think, though, from an economy standpoint, it also there's a lot of education that has to come along with it. So if you're silver spoon fed in white suburbia, you understand what the stock market is. You know that investing is important to your economic future. I don't know if that's being taught in inner city, you know, schools. I think in inner city schools, you know, there's a lot of money that pours into Abbott districts that doesn't result in higher, you know, graduation rates and things like that. And, you know, the question is why? Why is this not working? We've been throwing money at these things. We have affirmative action that should give people equal opportunities and equal wages. And it doesn't always result in this, in what we would expect as, you know, meaningful results. And, you know, you ponder this, and obviously it's not an easy question to answer. You know, you hear a lot about family dynamics and not having parents that, you know, show you the right path, or you lose a parent early, or, you know, is incarcerated, like Mike's point. So now you're in a single parent household or in a foster system, and you don't have that role model. And Pete, you mentioned earlier that there's a lot of successful Black, you know, African Americans that could do more back in their communities, and, you know, certainly be there as inspiration. And maybe once they ride that, you know, food chain up and get out of the projects or the inner cities, why are they not, you know, being vocal and going back to help out where they can and be inspirational, as opposed to finding their McMansion in the, you know, in the suburbs somewhere and working their 6-figure job. So it's not an easy answer, but economics, I know, is definitely, you know, when you're living paycheck to paycheck or on food stamps, it's really hard to dig yourself out. It's challenging. And if you get 1 or 2 little charges on your records at a young age, and you look maybe to the military as a, you know, way out, and that's not an opportunity anymore. I mean, and college, being able to afford college is a struggle as well. I think, you know, it's disheartening, unfortunately, and there's no easy solution. I wish there was. But, you know, I know there's a lot of opportunities and scholarships and programs set up for those inner city youth. But I still think they need someone to be the inspiration and to drive them to be better than where they're at. That's all.
So I like Joe's point and Mike's point. I think you got to combine them.
I was going to say talented 10th real quick before I forget. Sorry, I just got to beat out the talented 10th of a population within minority communities. And it's still the brightest, smartest, strongest athletes. And they're pulled out of those communities, and then they're given this opportunity to shine. And kind of where Joey was going, same thing. But it's definitely a systematic thing that's been happening forever. They do it in third world countries. All these, you know, people come over to America and they better themselves. They don't necessarily give back. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just didn't want to forget.
No, you bring up a good point. So Mike, I don't want to get too far with this. I want to, if you take Mike's point and Joe's point, and I think this is the layers that need to be pulled back that they don't. When you talk about economics, and to Joe's point, yes, people who are brought up in certain households, you know, it could be suburbs or urban, but we find this tendency that if you're growing up in a household that's more, you know, upper class or more educational, you're going to learn more about investing in assets, as far as assets in the stock market, as far as real estate, even maybe even have a trust fund due to a life insurance policy, things like this.
Or just a
And
budget.
yeah, and a budget. But then the flip side is also is that, to Mike's point, and I think when we talk about the decriminalization, is that if you don't have, if you have a single mother who's raising children, she doesn't have the father there. I think that's that dynamic when it comes to psychology, or let's say social economics, that if you don't have another person there, we see that now it takes two people to raise a household, that does impact now the quality of life of children. Studies have shown that people who live in poverty after 2 generations, the IQ actually lowers, just based off your quality of life. So now that's something that I would like to see addressed, is while we're addressing decriminalization on certain like marijuana, or trying to address a justice system, how do you bring the family back together? Because if you're going to improve any quality of life and social economics, it also starts at home, teaching people how to do a budget, teaching people to invest their money. Instead of buying, let's be honest, $200 Jordan shoes, you can put those $200 towards even something simple as a gym membership, because that helps overall for your mental and physical health. I think that's the discussion that we're not having. Mike, I'm sorry, you were going to say something?
Well, kind of tying to that, I know I went off a little off topic with that question on the economy, but the reason why is because you can't talk about racism in the economy without talking about the persecution of people of color in this country by law enforcement. You just can't. To your point, how do we ask a Black child to succeed in America as effectively as a white child when we've ripped their father from their home and put them in prison for life, when we broke 3 generations of that family by putting them in prison, or they died out on the streets? How do we have that conversation? It seems to me like a lot of people want to solve this problem because they want to concentrate on the effect. Violence in urban areas, Black on Black violence, Black on Black crime. But what I now understand, what I didn't understand prior to a week and a half ago, is that Black on Black violence is a symptom of a 400-year-old problem in this country. And that is it. You can't solve that problem with training. You can't solve that problem by being more diverse and hiring police officers. We can only solve that problem by acknowledging the problem, by acknowledging how we got here.
But Mike, that's where I disagree. I think the country has acknowledged. I mean, you have leaders, Democrats, Republicans, acknowledging racism. We have statues that's being taken down, things like this.
Look what it took to happen. Look what it took for that to happen now.
But what I see, and this is where I look at, when you have people like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, W.E.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, these were civil rights leaders that dealt with racism on a level that's different than today's standards. And what I find is that in between, when you look at these historical figures, they're even they made effort. Let's take Malcolm X, for example. Malcolm X I think he may not even had a high school degree. He went to jail for a nonviolent offense, and what he did is he took that time to educate himself. He got out of jail. Not only was he more educated, but then he evolved as a person, that when he learned about the truth about the Nation of Islam, and he learned that Islam is a religion of Black, whites, everything else, he was able to transform and now be more open and accepting of other people. He changed his philosophy. Now, when it comes within the Black community, while African Americans are locked up more, what about also what we're teaching our children? I mean, one thing that disturbs me, I go to some places and you see Black people strung out on the streets. I mean, we have to acknowledge that, and their children are sitting up there watching them. I mean, you can't blame, in my opinion, you can't blame a white person for someone willingly, doing drugs. Is addiction a problem? Yes, addiction is a problem in the white neighborhoods. Addiction is a problem in Hispanic. Addiction is a problem in Blacks. It may be different drugs. And that comes down to, now we have a mental health issue within this country, because people can be addicted to alcohol. And we had COVID-19. I know I'm getting off topic a little, but we had COVID-19. We had the liquor stores open, the gyms closed, and the churches closed. And those are ways that people can address mental health issues. So when you talk about now the African American community, I think slavery, like someone says, has played an effect from a generational standpoint, the Black mindset. But what are we now doing? I don't see the last greatest sociologist or psychologist was W.E.B. Du Bois, who founded the NAACP back in the early 1900s with white people. And he talked about his philosophy was that the talented tenth, the black population needs to go down and reach up, educate our youth, as opposed to Booker T. Washington talked about we need to teach people how to plan and be industrialists. We don't have that Black dialect right now within our society. You have entertainers and basketball players talking about this, but where's our academic Black professors who are looking at the data and saying, you know what, we need to start addressing some issues in here. Right now, we've talked about socioeconomics, we've talked about parenting, we talked about how criminalization has an effect on the household. I don't hear that dialogue really out in the news. I mean, is anybody else?
Great point. Yeah, we don't hear. That's where it starts. I mean, rounding it all up, that's where it's going to start, is at home. And you got to get, like you said, with the town tent, those people need to get out there. We need to have those people, which we don't. I think right off the top of my head, Black person who's speaking out, it's going to be like Oprah, Tyler Perry, people that, not that they can't make a difference because they do have money, but they're not in office. They're not starting grassroots production at the bottom. Like, she's not in the inner city. I don't have an answer for that, but I agree with that. They need to see more.
You have the CEO of Merck, the second biggest country in the world. He's African American, Kenneth Frazier. He was actually on Donald Trump's one of his councils. He left because he wasn't in favor of some of the comments that Donald Trump made. But you have him. You had a Black CEO of Merrill Lynch, American Express. I mean, these are some of your top Fortune 500 companies. They've been silent in this. Where have they been? Pouring money back.
They're not coming out. There's nobody. They don't want to jeopardize. They don't want to. Either way, exactly.
Where are they pouring money into the community, saying, you know what? Yeah, if racism, not just racism, but we need to educate our community. How are we putting money back into the community to set up either STEM programs or programs in teaching and financing? I mean, right down the street from where I'm at, they have a nonprofit that goes in and teaches kids how to invest and makes it fun, the stock market game, and have competitions. Why are we not doing those type of things? That's just me personally seeing that we have a responsibility as well as a parent. I make sure that I go over some of these things. Turning off the TV, you're not going to watch SpongeBob, you're not going to watch this, you're going to watch Warren Buffett has a show, Secret Millionaires Club, that he actually has LeBron James on his show. LeBron James used Warren Buffett as his financial advisor. And you see the benefit that LeBron James, this is a guy who's making business-wise decisions with a group of his people, and he has his own talent management. He's talking about doing movies, Space Jams 2. That's something outside the NBA, and he's doing other things. I feel like we have a responsibility where we need to do more things rather than just protesting, but actual actions of teaching. I don't know if anybody feels differently, but.
So do you want to answer? I have my own points.
No. You're very articulate, Mike.
I would say it's extraordinary to me that we are asking the Black community to solve problems that have been caused by 400 years of an institutional racist government. That's extraordinary to me. It sounds like people are saying, why is the Black community not doing more to clean up their areas? The burden is not on the Black community. The burden is on the United States of America to figure out how we got to this point by acknowledging the problem. I mean, it's just that simple. We talk about economics. We talk about why Black on Black crime is high. And again, it is a symptom. How do you expect these kids to survive when you have law enforcement going in there like the military, putting them up against the wall randomly, checking their pockets? Stop and frisk was a huge policy in New York. I promise you, I never got stopped and frisked when I was in New York, but you talk to a black person and they did. And that's not to say when I was younger, I didn't do dumb things like other kids did, but I didn't have to deal with those. I didn't have to deal with the repercussions of that. And the reason why I didn't have to deal with the repercussions of that with law enforcement was simply because I'm white. And that's ridiculous. That's just crazy to me. So to
I
put the
think the
burden
contrast between you, I'm sorry, but between you and Peter's like point of view is so interesting. Like how you, I mean, obviously you've had this awakening too, but just seeing how he's saying, the black community needs to get in there, and you're saying, no, the white community needs to get in there. It obviously, I think, needs to be both. But as a black person living in this country for so long, and nothing's been done systematically, so it's kind of like the black community is taking it on themselves and trying to own it. And I think that's where he's
tell
coming
a quick story.
too.
If I
The
could
white
tell
state.
a very quick story of how systemic racism works, and I'm going to make this really quick. When I was 21 years old, I was hanging out with 3 black friends in Vauxhall. I grew up in Union, and we decided to go into Newark to get something to eat. It was me, 3 black friends. I was driving my car. I'm on Springfield Avenue, broad daylight. Undercover Maplewood cop pulls up alongside me. He sees me. I go. He gets in back of me and he lights me up. I roll down the windows. I take the keys out of the ignition. I put it on the dashboard. I'm always very respectful like that when the police pulls me over. It's not my first time. And cop comes to my window and I say, "How you doing, officer?" And the first thing he says to me is, "Get out of the car." Now, I didn't know my rights back then. I was 21 years old, 20 years old. So I got out of the car. He takes me to the back. Second thing he says to me is, "Who are these guys?" I said, "They're my friends. We're going into Newark to get food." He goes, "Well, I want to search you and I want to search your car." Now, he hasn't even told me why he's pulled me over at this point. So I said at this point, "Well, do you mind if I ask why he pulled me over?" And he said, "Well, yeah, there's a car theft ring in the area. I'm checking out cars." I didn't know my rights. I was a 21-year-old kid. I said, "Sure." He searched me like a criminal. He searched my 3 friends like a criminal. He searched my car. 3 other cops showed up. They watched this whole thing happen. When it was all said and done, he found nothing. And he was so, I'll use the word butthurt, that he didn't find anything. He actually was so petty that he started questioning my friend, my black friend, on a bag of sports jerseys that he had. He had like 2 football jerseys that he was going to wear, one of them. And he was questioning him on the receipt. At this point, the other cops are rolling their eyes like, "Are you serious?" And long story short, he lets us go and we drive off. I have been driving for 20 years. I've been pulled over 20 times. I'm a speeder, I'll admit it, okay? I have never been searched. That was the only time I've ever been searched, ever in my life. I've never been pulled over because of a car theft ring. None of that has ever happened. It happened because I was with 3 black friends. And that happens every single day. That is white privilege, and it is wrong. So we can talk about all these other things in this country, about making it in America, and about blacks having more leaders. But how are they supposed to have more leaders when we're putting them in jail? How are they supposed to have more leaders when we kill them? You talked about Martin Luther King. You talked about Malcolm X. Look up Fred Hampton. He was an extraordinary civil rights leader in the 60s. 21 years old, he founded a coalition called Rainbow Coalition. He was one of the only civil rights leaders at that time to recruit whites, blacks, Puerto Ricans, Native Americans, and it was all about diversity. And at 21 years old, they didn't put a statue up for him. They assassinated him. The FBI, in connection with Chicago police, they went into his apartment at 4:30 in the morning and they shot and killed him with his pregnant wife sitting next to him at 21. They tried to arrest all the Black Panthers. They tried to arrest all of them and put them on trial and send them to prison because J. Edgar Hoover was a racist. He ran the FBI for 50 years and he was absolutely a part of the problem. So when you ask about Black community helping Black community, my answer is, why are we putting the burden on them when we haven't even acknowledged why this problem is what it is?
I have an answer for that, but Joe, you've been quiet for a while.
Yeah, I mean, opposite of Mike's point that 400 years, African Americans have been oppressed, which I don't oppose and I agree with. but I don't think what happened 400 years ago, nonetheless 150 years ago, has any impact on how Black Americans act today or strive to better themselves today. Again, you know, I get back to how the parents are raising them. Do they want to make their lives a little better? And I know the chips are definitely stacked against an inner city African American than they are against an African American living out in the suburbs, right? I understand that, and it's very difficult. There are success stories, far and few in between. I think that their only ticket out though is becoming a star athlete, right? Because that's what we see most often, or a rapper, you know, become like, those are their idols. Like you said before, Peter, the CEO of Merck is not their idol for whatever reason, or the Ben Carson neurosurgeon is not their idol because maybe the media is portraying him as an Uncle Tom or someone that, you know, is similar to Donald Trump because he's working for his administration. But like, a Ben Carson is the perfect example of someone that you should look up to and strive to be like, coming from inner city himself. I agree with Stacy that it's a cultural issue, and both sides of the aisle, white, black, no matter what color you are, needs to step up to the plate and make things more civil than what they are now. I think rioting and looting, although it gets national attention, it certainly does. But usually those bad characters are doing that, have nothing to do or have no agenda with the Black Lives Matter movement or any type of, you know, racial equality. They're just there to cause havoc. And I can't fault people that want to loot because they're suppressed, they're on food stamps, and they see an opportunity to go and grab a new pair of sneakers or some clothes for their baby. Like, I can't, you know, more power, like, not more power to them. They're breaking the law, but I don't look down upon those people that are taking the opportunity to go grab something from a store that, yeah, you go intentionally go break into, you know, a high-end diamond district to go steal some jewelry. Like, you don't need that. Like, I can understand diapers and sneakers, but it's a different thing. But nonetheless,
I think they should get a pass. Like, people, whether you need diapers, whatever, toilet paper, and our like, you shouldn't get a pass to loot and riot. There's no excuse. Just like the person who killed George Floyd, that cop is the exception. Just like those, there's no.
right. And I think, you know, and I think law enforcement has to be held to a higher standard. I think there's definitely reform needed. They need to be trained better. They need to be held accountable. There's been too many cases where they get off scot-free for committing a crime that they should have been convicted for. And, you know, it's unfortunate. You know, in some cases, the justice system is going to support them no matter what, even though they were in the wrong. I think we're still a generation removed from getting into a whole different, I mean, we still have parents that might have tendencies of racism with them, right? There's a whole boomer generation that still has those tendencies because they grew up in the 60s or the 70s and their parents were hardcore racist. Like, so of course there's still people in America that have racism as part of just their growing up. I think the millennial generation, Generation X, started to change. And then obviously the millennial generation is really the first generation that doesn't see racism the way that the prior generations do. But I think it's still a generation removed. Like, my kids, they wouldn't know any of the words that we may have heard growing up, like, at all. And, you know, my wife and I make it an absolute point that they view everyone equal. I don't care who you are, race, whatever, religion, you're going to treat everyone the same all the time. And if not, you're going to answer to me. And they don't want to answer to me because I still hold the iron fist in my house.
So Mike, I want to answer your question, and maybe this is where how me and Joe agree, is I think it comes down to parenting too. You know, well, I give you a perfect example. Growing up, my father didn't let me listen to certain rap music. And ironic part is some of this rap music and some of the lyrics, if you hear the same thing over and over again, if I say run, like I was taught, you don't tell your kids don't run because they hear run and they're going to run. You say walk. And if you listen, even some of the music that's out there, how they degrade women, Black people talking about how we've had this conversation before about how women are depicted and talked about. And yet, when we talk about African Americans, a lot of times you talk about the African males and not the African American females, who, when you look at it from an economic perspective, yes, they're not the ones going to jail, but when it comes to society, they're the ones that's making 50 cents off the dollar of what a white male is. So when I say what the African American community can do is when it comes with Blacks, is learning that, yes, I think slavery had an effect on the house rearing and the family dynamic. You know, slavery had an effect where families were being ripped apart. We all know that. We can speak about that. We know that. We've seen movies about it. And that's what I'm saying. What is the African American community saying? We know how we got here. How are we fixing the family dynamic? And, you know, you do have a few entertainers, Morgan Freeman being one of them, that's not in favor of some of the entertainment that's being put out there. When you hear the language that's out there, of course you're gonna have kids growing up. That's what they're thinking. Like they want to be these entertainers. You know, you look at the 69 guy. I forgot what he went to jail, ran out this person, and everything else. I would never let my kid listen to that. Instead, my children know about Neil Tyson deGrasse. He is not only an African American, but he is a scientist. You know, you saw the movie Hidden Figures, where you talk about these extraordinary African American women. Unfortunately, that took 50 years for that movie to get out, but they were more than just African American. They were also women, and they were also mathematicians, which those are role models where I have my daughter. I want her to learn about that, because you don't have to be an entertainer who's rapping about this and that. You don't have to be a stripper that turned an entertainer. And we're quick to say, well, you know, that's okay, but what message are we putting into our children, rather than sit down and this is what happens in the white suburbs. You're going to do your math. You're going to learn about derivative products. You're going to learn about insurance products. And it's, I'll give you this example. One thing I learned is when it came with police and fire, when I made a push for this and we did in our town, is think about it this way. If your father's a police officer and your uncles are a police officer, and then your other uncle's a firefighter, you're growing up in a household thinking, you know what, I'm going to be a police officer. I'm going to be a firefighter. Now, not only that, you understand what the process is, that, all right, to become a police and fire, you know, you need to take a test. All right, these are some of the things that are on a test. And we see this time and time again. People usually choose the field that their parents were in. So, you know, part of bringing up a generation of minorities, you know, up into the workforce, we have to come up with a plan of going back to the basics, becoming a lawyer, I mean, we do have a more diverse police force throughout the country. Why are we not talking about that? You know, that's something to be proud of, is that, you know, in my town, we hired an African-American police officer. Well, we didn't hire him, I'm sorry. He became police chief. He scored number 2 on the test as far as ranking. That was something we took pride in. There's a newspaper article. You don't hear about that, you know? So I mean, this is actually a great topic, but it's 9 o'clock. I mean, we could talk about this all night.
Well, if I could just answer it real quick, I'll give you a
yes. Oh, Mike, I'm gonna give you 1 minute, because I think we all.
That's fine. Look, it sounds like the question really is, why are we celebrating rappers and not CEOs and lawyers and doctors? And that's America. America doesn't celebrate doctors and lawyers. We grew up watching Goodfellas. We grew up watching Casino. We grew up watching mafia movies and Die Hard, John McClane killing the bad guys. We grew up with violence in this country. And it's amazing to me how all the people who are talking about the bad influences in rap say nothing about the bad influences in Hollywood. None of them, not one of them. Rappers did not create violence in the streets. They were simply talking about poetry of the streets. That was poetry. They were talking about their world, how they were growing up. I listened to rap in my childhood. I never wanted to go out and kill someone. So the idea that listening to music cause this is crazy. I'm just going to make this really quick point about the 400 years systemic racism and how that's gotten us here. Imagine if you were playing a game of Monopoly and every round was a year. And for 300 years, You, Peter, and you, Stacy, were not allowed to play. You are not allowed to play Monopoly. Only me and Joe can play Monopoly. And not only can you not play, but you have to do all the work. You have to spin for us. You have to build the hotels and the houses, and you get nothing for it. Then for 50 years, okay, now you can have your own Monopoly board, but you have to play in the corner. You can't play with us. You have to play with people that look just like you. And every time you build a house, every time you build a business, every time you build a hotel, people come in, white people, and they burn it down. They drop bombs on it. They lynch you. They put you in prison for a frivolous crime. And then for 50 years after that, they say, okay, now you can play Monopoly with us. Catch up. How do you catch up? Me and Joe have been playing this game and our ancestors for 350 years. We have generational problems. This movie, 13th, there's a quote in it by a professor. And he said, white people in this country are here because of the choices of our ancestors, our parents, our grandparents. A lot of black people in this country are here not because of the choices of their ancestors, because of choices that were made for them. And we are all commingled in this society right now, and we can't even acknowledge that as a problem. So how do we fix it without acknowledging that? I don't think we can.
I'm gonna flip
All right,
over your
hold on. All right, Stacey, you. Yeah.
there.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I said I'm gonna flip over his Monopoly board. We just gotta start a new game, which is basically, I think, the point of this whole conversation is it has to start over. It's not something we can't fix.
But it's
and
not.
You can't erase it either. But
We're not starting the game over. There's
Joe, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Pete, for hosting this call. It's informative, obviously, much respect to everyone on, and obviously hearing all these different viewpoints. It's obviously not an easy thing. You know, we can't sprinkle fairy dust on the problem and have it solved overnight. I think this is going to be, a generation of people standing up, speaking for the other side, doing the right thing, hiring someone, giving them a chance. I think a lot of it starts, like I said earlier, top-down leadership, having to step up and actually meet in the middle and start making constructive changes and laws that'll actually help. I don't think that just throwing money at a problem is always the end-all, be-all solution. I think the money has to be spent well. There's lots of Abbott districts that get twice as much dollars per student and still have failing or lower than expected graduation rates. You see charter schools doing exceptionally well in inner cities, whereas the down the street PS 58 isn't doing quite as well. But I think that overall, police systemically, yes, there's obviously there's some bad apples, and I think reform and training and continuing education, outreach programs, and getting the all parties involved at the table talking about constructive change. I don't think it's going to stop overnight. I think that someone working the beat in an inner city at 1 o'clock in the morning, seeing a group of people on a corner, are going to approach them and see what's going on. And unfortunately, predominantly in those inner cities, you're going to have African Americans get targeted in those instances. So it's not like, unless we could have everyone move into blended communities like Howell. Now Howell is more blended than it ever has been. It's a really tough problem. I want to be a solution. I want to help. I'm going to raise my children to, always respect and treat everyone equally. And I think that's really the biggest play here is, learn from this. We have to teach each other, be respectful, give opportunities where people earn the merits to have that opportunity, and, look out for each other. We're all Americans together. We should all be helping each other and rising up together as opposed to beating each other down and screaming across the aisle. That's all.
Stacey, you have anything?
no, I think, again, like everybody said, it was great to hear the different sides. I really like the dynamic between you and Mike. I don't know how long you've been friends, but outside of this. But yeah, no, I think that we all brought a different spin to it too. So.
No, thank you guys all for coming. I mean, obviously
Thank
this is a complex issue. Um, and I think, what's ironic and what's sad is that actually we can have a dialogue and talk about this more than what you see being talked about in the media. Even talking with our elected officials, entertainers. I think that's what bothers me the most is that there's not a simple issue. Within this conversation, Mike brings up points, Joe brings up points, Stacey bring up points, and that was just four of us bringing up points. Based off the limited data that we have and some of our own personal experience. And what bothers me is why we're not having this dialogue as a nation as far as, on the one sense, I think, me and Joe, I think we're on the same page with this is, you talk about 400 years, you can't hold, what's going on today with people responsible for 400 years. I'm going to say, Mike, why you can't is because the mentality of people today is not the same as it was 400. And so I would say, challenge people, take that mentality of us working together. Everyone agrees, everything. I mean, basically racism is wrong. Now, how do we go in there and change it? It's more than just the justice system. You have a social problem, an economics problem. What people don't know is, educate the youth. You have loans for the business community that designated for women and women of color. Women get double the benefits. Are we going in and properly explaining this to women how to become business owners? And then once you become a business owner, not just surviving, but how are you thriving and reinvesting in it yourself? You have a woman like Madam CJ Walker, who, she's a success. She was, why is she not being taught in school, and not just to African Americans, but to all women? And I think we need to take the narrative of now just Black History Month, and if we want to be inclusive, talking about American history. One of my favorite people is Frederick Douglass. This is a guy who was born a slave, who was taught how to read by his slave master's wife, and literally by the end of his life became a vice president nominee of the United States in a place that he was born a slave. Are we going to say everyone's like that? No, but I think that is key. Where we have to change the mentality in this country. I mean, it's just ironic that athletes have that in their mindset that they're going to do whatever it takes to get to that level. And we hear these success stories, even entertainers. But when it comes to professionals and people, I'm not excusing what happens, but how do we change that dialogue that, you know what, I don't care what's happening here, I'm going to succeed, and I'm going to be around other people who want to see me succeed. You guys are on this call because you guys are all my friends, and there's other people out there that want to be part of the solution. And I think that's what we need to focus on is solutions. We've acknowledged the past. I think we've had. You're not going to change everybody's mind, but what we can do is come collectively together and finding out what the issues are and properly addressing them in a systematic and way. So I think we definitely need to have another call and maybe we'll do something down the road, but this was definitely fun. I appreciate everyone's input.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. There you go. And watch 13th.
I am.
Sold. We're sold.
All right. I'll talk to you guys later.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.